Howdy, we're out here today with NeighborMedia, Cambridge Community TV. I'm Chris Herold.
And Ruben Tutsky. Nice to meet you.
So our Speaker's Corner topic of the day is Larry Summers, Fed Chair. Larry Summers graduated from the Harvard Graduate Economics Department, and the next year, in 1983, at the age of 28, he became one of the youngest tenured professors in the history of Harvard. He left Harvard in 1991 to serve as chief economist for the World Bank. In 1993, he joined the Clinton administration, becoming Department Treasury Secretary in 1995. In 1999, Summers succeeded his mentor, Robert Rubin, as Treasury Secretary. In 2001, he became president of Harvard. He resigned from Harvard in 2006. Obama is now considering whether to make him the chair of the U.S. Federal Reserve. What do you think?
Well, I think it's a controversial choice for sure.
There we go. Good afternoon. So Larry Summers, what do you think?
He's a walking disaster area. And Larry Summers had made many mistakes before, and he always makes them with tremendous self-assurance. And I think he would go on making mistakes.
Yeah, I knew Larry Summers when he was president of Harvard. I'm a prof here. I teach Armenian. Overall, I respect him very highly, and I think that he would probably make a good Fed chairman. I have a sense that some of the opposition to him in Washington bears the same overtones as the whispering campaign at Harvard when he was let go here. That disturbs me. I think he needs a fairer hearing than he might be getting with less ad hominem aspects.
And of course he made mistakes as president of Harvard. He was an economist when Harvard invested in bad securities, and as a result of those investments made on his presidency, on his watch, Harvard lost a very substantial share of its endowment.
During his tenure, the Harvard endowment suffered a big whack.
Well, he was so unsure of himself that in order to establish himself, his first move was to look around and take on one of the big wheels. So that ego got in his way a little bit, because the person he chose to take on was Cornel West. And Cornel West wasn't having any of this nonsense. And the reason he took him on was that he was the most popular, one of the most popular teachers in the classroom in Harvard College. And he was one of the important people in the creation of the Black Studies program. And the consequence of this was, Cornel West says, I don't have to stay here, I can go any place I want. He took off and went to Princeton. That was the first move.
I think he rubbed a lot of people here the wrong way because he was trying to change some fundamental things and felt that that was part of his duty as president, that he'd been asked to do this. And so as a result, it didn't last very long. It didn't end that well. But a lot of people here, I think, liked him quite a lot. I was going to give a freshman seminar on world literature, and he gave me a lot of personal support in getting the curriculum passed, and in order to thank him, my class and I invited him to dinner at my house. He came, and he stood up the whole evening and talked to my students. There were 25 of them. We were all jammed into my dining room on Memorial Drive, and everyone was just enchanted by him. He was really easy to get along with.
Summers, what do you think?
Hi, I'm Beth McNary. I really can't figure out even the notion of considering him for an appointment in government. I mean, he's a very brilliant guy, but there seems to be issues around interacting with others. The undergrads loved him. They loved him because he was all about core curriculum and that type of thing, and he interacted with them very well.
Then when something came up about the issue of using the boycott to deal with Israeli apartheid, he came up with a beautiful thing and tried to put a stop to it, and gave a sermon in which he used the idea of anti-Semitic in effect, if not in intent. And that rhetoric, that's anti-Semitic in effect, if not in intent, really blew my mind. Anyhow, as a former college professor, his relationships with the faculty were the attitude of, I'm going to establish myself with the Board of Trustees with how I abuse the faculty. The way he dealt with the women's issues, that was the last straw.
What did he do with women's issues?
He was explaining that there are certain fields, like economics, where women don't have the right kind of mind for it. That got him into trouble. He was always putting his foot in his mouth.
I was at the business school when he got appointed, and I didn't agree with his opinion on there's something being innate or inherently in the genes in women not being as well equipped to excel in science as men. I'm a woman and I'm a physicist.
Yes.
And I think that I did just as well as the men, so I wasn't sure that there was anything innate or genetic, or whether it was from exposure and where we push our children when they're young. I don't think it'd be a good chair for the Fed, because I think, to me, this is such a fundamental point of contention that I couldn't possibly support someone who feels that way.
I hate to put everything down to that one remark about women, but the fact that this is not the only time he's done things like that, and a Fed chair is around for a very long time and has to be very careful.
I think about the time he was president here at Harvard, and the comments he made, especially that one about women in science. And I think, you need somebody with a little bit more sensitivity, and that kind of role where what he says affects the market. I don't think he deserves to be Fed chair. Plus, I think it's time for a woman to be chairperson of the Fed. I think we have come so far in women's rights, and I think it's time that we start getting qualified women into some of these positions. Because some of these old guys that have been there since time immemorial, their ideas have all washed up. It's time for some new blood and some new thinking.
Then there's the whole story of the Russian connection. You probably know about that.
Can you please tell us about that?
Well, I forget the name, so I'm an old man. But it had to do with the possibility of a criminal lawsuit for abuse.
Oh, Andre Schleifer.
Yes, that's right. And that was a protege of Larry Summers, with his blessing all the way, who really abused his brief from the State Department in Russia and so on. He was hired by the State Department to go teach the Russians how to do capitalism. And what he did was to personally buy cheap and sell dear, buy up state manufacturing units and so on in Russia cheap as his personal property, and then sell them for a higher price. And this was an abuse, and it led to the State Department considering a criminal lawsuit and so on. And Larry Summers got him off by having Harvard give a vast sum of money to the State Department to settle out of court for this lawsuit against his protege. This man was his protege.
Larry Summers is a really smart guy, and his intellect is very impressive, and he's always been associated with decision making at very high levels, so he's had exposure to a lot of good input, and he's been part of some big decisions. A lot of those decisions have not always worked out really well. So one example would be associated with the derivatives in the late 90s, where they sort of tore down lots of regulatory infrastructure and squashed a lot of plans. And I think that led directly to the 2008 meltdown.
He was part of the group that was allowing deregulation of the banking system, and I think deregulation of the banking system caused a lot of problems. I don't think that he was not prima mentis paris. I would say that Mr. Bush was, but certainly he acted not very carefully, and he deserves a certain amount of blame.
So what do you think, Larry Summers, Fed chair?
Yeah, let's go for it. So mainly I'm supporting him because Janet Yellen isn't the best choice in my opinion.
And why is that?
I think that while she might be very good, she's perceived as dovish. Well, since she's perceived as dovish, I think that the expectation is that she behave dovishly, and that whenever you have expectations around what you're going to do, it gives you less maneuvering room. I liked Alan Greenspan's approach of just keeping a secret and saying as little as possible, but projecting this image that he knows exactly what's going on and he's fully in control.
Summers projects an image of being in control, is that right?
I think so. He projects that he's brilliant and that he's a wild card and he's not going to be bound by rules.
He was one of the people who allowed the end of Glass-Steagall, which was the Chinese wall between the regular banks and the investment banks. And I don't think that was a good idea. You can see what happened in the 2000s. Now, admittedly, he wasn't there in the 2000s. A lot of these things could have been prevented by the people who were in power, and the Republicans, in my opinion, deserve more blame than does the Rubin and Summers. But neither of them were. They don't deserve any accolades.
But before that, the repeal of Glass-Steagall was Larry Summers was one of the 4 or 5 people who were responsible for getting Bill Clinton to do that, along with his mentor Robert Rubin, who is still on the board of governors of Harvard University, and Alan Greenspan, and 1 or 2 others. They're the ones who persuaded the federal government to take this dangerous and tragic step to repeal the law that built in the safeguards against the crash that then came in 2008.
What is his overall view about government regulation?
I think now he's a little bit more positive about it, but he has not yet really said, yes, I made a mistake, we made a mistake, we shouldn't have done what we did. I mean, he hasn't been very forthcoming with an admission of that he probably made a mistake and what his positions were. But currently he's taken some better positions, and he might be a reasonably good Fed chairman, but I think Yellen has been a more reasonable person. And, I think Obama I certainly think he's better than the alternatives that the Republicans have for us.
Everyone really contributed there, a lot of brilliant people. I think Alan Greenspan's pretty brilliant, and he contributed, and so did Bill Clinton. He had a hand in that too. But it doesn't really mean that, I don't know, it's hard to ascribe blame directly. I think it was just part of the zeitgeist of that decade. Well, I think deregulation was problematic if you look at Enron and the companies that abused it, but it's not a wholesale bad idea. It just needs to be considered more carefully. Now, I kind of disagree with Larry Summers' resistance toward regulating derivatives. And in fact, I think that you need to figure out how to regulate something like that in order to allow it, because it can produce a lot of unforeseen consequences. And if you don't know how to regulate it, then maybe you shouldn't allow it.
Although I tend to skew more Tea Party libertarian, I have a lot of common ground with the Occupy side. Both of these, at present marginal but pretty broadly based popular movements, have a distrust of the system that seems to be stacked in favor of the club of people who tend to be very clubby and very friendly with each other and operate to their own mutual benefit, to the detriment of the people who aren't in the club.
Well, Larry Summers is a very fine person. He's had some controversies, but I see no reason why our country should continue to be ruled by people from Goldman Sachs. Let's just try regular people for a while. Those guys have had their chance, and we know what they did, and the evidence is everywhere. And so go with somebody else. Clear those people out. No matter how important they are or how many times they went to Harvard or ruled Harvard, it's just forget all about that. Just get rid of Goldman Sachs government.
I think Obama's kind of taken some heat for hiring all the usual suspects. I think he could possibly get somebody a little edgier and somebody that's going to do more for working class people rather than the bankers. I think Summers sort of has a reputation for being one of the in crowd, and the Wall Street friendly people.
And Larry Summers has been wrong about so many things, you know. The bailout, you know, I mean, he sided with the bankers. There were just a number of things that he recommended in the 90s in particular that were wrong when, you know, he was advising Clinton. I can't imagine why people think that he's the best guy for the job, you know, and maybe just because he's a guy.
Many of his past mistakes have been very costly to the world and to the USA, and I think we would have more of these mistakes if he became the head of the Fed. Well, he was absolutely certain there would be no global warming. Yes? Yes, and you know the famous memo he sent about we should send more waste materials to countries that have low income, because if somebody dies from pollution who wouldn't have made much money, that's less economic damage than us rich American white people dying from pollution at an early age. And therefore we should let those people abroad in the poor countries die from our pollution. We should export more pollution abroad. This famous, notorious memo he sent to the staff of the World Bank when he was there. Another example. Yeah. The list is big.